Codex Astartes, the Rockbreakers Legion. Prologue, Heart of the Fortress. The air was thick, heavy with the acrid tang of ozone and the metallic stench of cordite, a foul scent born of charred Xenos flesh and spilled blood that sickened the nose. The reinforced corridor's walls shimmered, stained by sweat and blood, scarred deeply from battles long past, their wounds festering upon the plastisteel surfaces. The floor was littered with corpses, the grotesque tapestry woven from the torn remnants of orc defenders and the scorched remains of the loyal yet fragile sons of the Astra Militarum, those valiant souls who had thrown their lives against the line before the Legiones Astartes arrived. But now the corridor belonged to the Rockbreakers, to the sons of the 11th Legion. They were 5, a single, unstoppable unit, Cadra Tor's battle squad. Their rust-brown ceramite armor, accented with granite-gray pauldrons, caught the scattered, impotent glimmers of las fire. Yet beneath the chipping paint lay sacred materials, untouched by ruin. Leading the vanguard strode 2 phalanx warriors, massive angular storm shields held firm before them. Upon the cobalt-blue, translucent fields, heavy bolter rounds fizzled and died like sparks against stone. The thunderous impacts dulled into muted, cavernous thuds beyond the shield light. The shield-bearers advanced slowly, mercilessly. Bones and rubble crackled beneath their feet. Grav studs sunk deep into the flooring with each deliberate step, forging a chilling symphony of metal and stone. They were immovable, an advancing, living fortress. Behind the shield wall, their 3 brothers marched under the slow pulse of kinetic protection. One gripped a heavy grav bolter, spitting distorted singularities that twisted reality as they tore towards distant cover. The shells struck with a warped crack, birthing gravity wells that crushed flesh and metal alike within seconds. The other 2 bore the Legion's iconic weapons, siege hammers armed with seismic amplifiers. The massive solid heads of these war hammers rested inert upon broad shoulders, but the barely contained fury of miniature solar storms simmered palpably in the air around them. Upon reaching the corridor's end, a massive adamantium gate barred their path, sullied by crude orc runes carved in blasphemous mockery. The shield-bearers halted. The grav studs locked with a hydraulic hiss into the floor. The shield's energy intensified, the blue fields condensing into an almost opaque wall. Through slits in the gate, orcs unleashed a panicked, hatred-filled storm of fire, but their shots shattered into blinding bursts of energy upon the blue barrier. Then the two Hammer brothers stepped forward. In solemn, heavy silence they raised their weapons. No command, no cries, only the silent understanding forged by decades of shared war. The hammerheads pulsed with deep azure light as their miniature plasma reactors surged toward critical ignition. One warrior swung, and the hammer struck with a sonic boom, cracking the air itself. The adamantium did not bend, but shattered atomically, fracturing like frozen glass. The blow's force rippled the corridor, the air trembling with pure, unfiltered power. After a heartbeat, the second warrior's blow fell, a razor-sharp echo on the very spot of the first. The gate exploded. On the other side, snarling orcs were torn to shreds by shrapnel and the sheer kinetic shockwave. The Rockbreakers did not hurry. Hastiness was the weapon of the weak. The shield-bearers released their locks and stepped deliberately over smoldering rubble. Behind them, the hammer-wielders slung their weapons back onto shoulders, faces devoid of triumph, yet marked by the cold, almost mathematical satisfaction of a task impeccably done. The battle cry erupted only when they glimpsed the reactor's pulsating, profane sanctuary, the heart of the fortress. Through the voxnet, the voices of all 5 warriors rang out together, forged into a single steel will. Saxum Frangimus.
Chronicles written in dust. In the deepest, most fiercely guarded sanctums of the Imperium's archives, where the air is thick with the dust of sealed knowledge and buried millennia, there lies a void. Among the glittering gold and moonlit silver names of the 20 Legionis Astartes, a darkened wound yawns. The 11th. No banner flies in their name, no battle cry pierces the silence, and no statue honors their primarch in the Hall of Heroes. Only the iron-forged prohibition of the senses and the agonizing echo of psychic erasure remain. Yet the faded beta discs from the dawn of the Great Crusade still whisper their tale. The Rockbreakers, the 11th Legion. They were not the scalpel's precise strike, but the unstoppable, grinding weight of pressure. A wedge forged by the Emperor's own hand, meant to shatter the most stubborn fortresses and crush the vilest alien empires into dust. Their sons were born of the galaxy's harshest mining worlds, men hardened under the relentless laws of stone and unyielding pressure. That legacy clung to their rust-brown and granite-gray armor. The unyielding nature, the endurance that might have shifted stars from their courses. Above them stood their primarch, Davor Carsthal, a being in whom the power of avalanches and the eternal stubbornness of mountains converged. Under his command, the Legion became masters of precision destruction. Where other legions broke through, the Rockbreakers destroyed all. Walls were not skirted, they were brought crashing down. Cities were not taken, they were leveled to the dust. Their battle cry, Saxum frangimus, we break the rock, was no mere threat, but a decree, a physical law etched into the fabric of reality with bolter fire and siege hammer strikes. Yet storms gather highest upon the mountain's peaks. Beneath Castel's loyalty dwelt the dark seed of pride, an arrogance potent enough to crack even the most noble ceramite. He eyed his brothers with bitter envy, those whose glories came easier, whose names were sung more loudly by the chronicles. When the War Master's betrayal set the galaxy aflame, Castel and his legion chose a different path. They did not bend their knee to Horus, nor remain faithful to the throne. Davor Castel stepped into the frozen, lonely darkness of his own ambition, dreaming of an empire forged by his hand alone. His treason sprang not from the whispers of chaos, but from his own poisoned heart. The Legion did not fracture, they imploded inwardly. Brother turned against brother in a cannibalistic civil war of such savagery that even the horrors of Istvan V paled in comparison. The Rockbreakers, born to shatter fortresses, destroyed the most crucial fortress of all, their own brotherhood. Then came the silence. The victors, whether followers of Horus or the Emperor, agreed on one truth. The 11th must be erased. Their name was chiseled from marble, their statues shattered to dust, and the last remaining gene seed purged in the hottest plasma reactors. Nothing remained but an empty, aching void in the ranks of 20 brothers, and a silent warning: even the greatest fortresses can crumble from within. Blood of the Mountains. Before the Legiones Astartes set forth to conquer the stars, they were first born in the dust and blood of sacred Terra. The Emperor, grand architect of the Great Crusade, sought not mere soldiers to unite humanity, but living weapons, each forged with a unique purpose and destiny. While some legions were bred for glorious battles upon open fields or surgical precision in void warfare, the 11th was shaped for a different fate. Their genetic legacy was drawn from the deepest, harshest core, the very bowels of Terra. Beneath the eternal snows of the Himalayas, in the tectonic anger-scarred depths, isolated mining clans and guilds of engineers had toiled for millennia. These people had not seen the sun, nor known the open sky. Their world was an eternal twilight within colossal fortress cities carved from stone, where the air hung heavy with the metallic tang of stone dust and recycled oxygen. For generations they lived beneath the surface, extracting the mountain's hidden treasures, while erecting structures that defied the planet's inner fury. Hardened, pragmatic, and taciturn, they were shaped by pressure and darkness. Survival meant endurance, not speed. The rock does not hasten, the rock endures. From this unyielding, uncompromising stock, the Emperor called forth the 11th.
The candidates were squat, broad-shouldered youths, their eyes reflecting the silence of the abyss. When the gene seed reshaped them, the transformation differed from other legions. The gene seed did not create new men, but perfected the unbreakable foundation the mountains had given. The weight of Astartes' armor was no burden, but a familiar embrace, the safety of stone. They showed a natural affinity for engineering sciences, static warfare, and the art of siege, as if the knowledge of dismantling and raising walls coursed through their veins. In the early days of the Great Crusade, the 11th Legion, the Rockbreakers, earned its dread renown. They did not strike with the speed of lightning. They possessed the relentless force of earthquakes. Where others circumvented fortresses, they trampled through them. Their tactics were not elegant. They were brutal, efficient, and absolute. Like a slow, inexorable glacier, they ground down resistance, be it Xenos strongholds or heretic bastions. They sought not glory, but resolution, and resolution was nearly always total annihilation. Yet this pragmatism and their insular inward nature planted a dark seed within. The children of the mountains never learned to bow. And in a galaxy where even the stars bow to the winds of betrayal, the steadfast rock will one day shatter to dust.
The Forging of Wrath. There are worlds among the stars that the cartographers of mankind's golden age marked with a single word: death. Terrathon was one of these damned places. It was not predatory flora or a toxic atmosphere that earned it this title, but the very stone from which it was born. A high-gravity, geologically unstable planet, it was a raging beast whose surface was tormented by perpetual, slow-moving earthquakes and sudden apocalyptic volcanic eruptions. The planet's crust was in constant motion, the groaning, grinding of tectonic plates the only music in the deafening silence. The sky was veiled by a thick, sulphurous ash cloud through which the light of its distant sun could only filter as an ominous crimson glow. Here, a splinter torn from the stars, the incubator capsule of the 11th Primarch crashed. The planet tried to swallow it, to crush it in its gravitational press or bury it beneath a sea of fresh lava. But the capsule's passenger did not die. The child, later known as Darvor Karsthal, was born into a world of stone and ore, and as an infant he claimed his right to exist against the planet's wrath. In the gigantic cavern systems beneath the surface lived the remnants of a forgotten human civilization, the people of the deeps. Their lives were a struggle for survival, a hopeless, generational battle against the planet that was both their home and their prison. Their cities were carved from stone, but these were not permanent structures. They were ever crumbling and ever rebuilt labyrinths. The key to survival was constant construction and an instinctive, masterful knowledge of stonecraft. In this dark, claustrophobic world, Darvor grew. The people of the deeps saw the child from the surface, this impossible survivor, as a Messiah born of stone, an incarnation of the mountain spirit. As he grew, his physical prowess and innate genius quickly made him their leader. He earned their respect not through conquest, but through construction. He had visions of the stone. He understood the planet's structure, its tensions, its fault lines. He taught them to raise cities that not only provided shelter, but defied the earthquakes. He showed them how to weaponize the planet's fury, how to channel seismic energies and divert lava flows. With his willpower and engineering genius, he began to reshape an entire world. When the Great Crusade fleet, led by the Emperor's gilded barge, arrived in the Terrathon system, they found a Primarch who already reigned. He sat not on a throne, but in the heart of a cavern city, his skin weathered by stone dust and sweat, bent over vast data slates and holographic blueprints. The Emperor saw not a lost son, but a living siege engine, a being who had not conquered a death world, but had tamed it and forged it in his own image. The Emperor had found his son, and with his son he had found the weapon that in his name would shatter the most stubborn walls to dust. The weight of victory. When Davor Karstal and the 11th Legion were united, it was not one of the gilded moments of fanfare and triumphal arches that adorned the chronicles of the Great Crusade. It was more akin to the cold, precise fitting of components within a vast machine. The Primarch looked upon his sons and saw not shining warriors. He saw his own reflection. Towering, rock-solid Astartes, whose rust-brown armor evoked the iron veins of a mountain. Their granite-gray pauldrons, the unworked stone. There was no fire in their gaze, only the silence of the abyss. And in that silence, the Primarch recognized a shared heritage, the laws of stone and pressure. Under his leadership, the Rockbreakers became not merely a legion, but a force of nature. Karstal treated destruction and construction as the highest forms of art, a brutal but elegant equation that always resolved into victory. Soon, their name became synonymous with the inexorable power the Emperor unleashed when a campaign faltered against the walls of a seemingly impregnable fortress. The breach of the Kraken Gorge orbital fortress system was not swift surgical strike, but a methodical, weeks-long annihilation. While other fleets wasted ordnance against void shields, the heavy bombers of the 11th Legion pulverized the structural connections between the platforms, isolating each fortress from its brethren like a surgeon excising a cancerous growth. Then came the phalanx squads, chewing their way through the guts of the dying platforms like steel worms, purging every corridor and chamber until the Kraken Gorge fell silent forever. The taking of Gorgon V's iron hives revealed an even darker form of warfare. The Legion did not fight from street to street. They brought down sector after sector. Their artillery targeted not enemy troops, but the load-bearing pillars of the hive cities, collapsing entire levels upon the defenders below. The air grew thick with the dust of pulverized plasteel, of stone, and of the million souls buried alive. After the victory, nothing remained of the iron hives but a gargantuan smoking mountain of rubble, a grotesque monument to the Rockbreakers' might. As the Great Crusade pushed toward the galactic rim, the 11th Legion cleansed the fortress worlds before the Cadian Gate. This was no longer conquest, it was sterilization. Worlds were rendered into compliant, lifeless rocks for the Imperium's future shield. Every living thing that might pose the slightest threat scoured from existence. Victory always had its price, and entire worlds were made to pay it. Davor and his legion always completed their task. This fact, this irrefutable certainty, began to curdle into a toxic pride within the Primarch's heart. He saw Rogel Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, and felt a contemptuous pity. "You are the great protector, brother," he thought, standing over the ruins of a subjugated world. "I break everything. Which is the harder task? Glory belonged to the defenders. Monuments were raised to them. But the true shaping power belonged to the destroyer. He was the Emperor's hammer, his most effective, most reliable instrument. Yet an instrument receives no glory, only its next task. The question was no longer whether they could break a fortress. The question had become whether a fortress still existed in the galaxy worthy of being broken by them. The doctrines of the stone. The culture of the 11th Legion was born of the deeps. It sprang from the claustrophobic, pressure-forged cavern cities of Terrakhthon and the cold, unyielding pragmatism of their Primarch. The Rockbreakers were morose, laconic, and terrifyingly deliberate. To them, war was no glorious clash of arms and ideals. War was an engineering problem to be solved. A fortress was not an enemy. It was a flawed structure to be systematically deconstructed to its smallest, most resilient components. This frigid, mathematical mentality was reflected in their every action, on the battlefield and off. Their faith was vested in the tangible, in steel, in stone, and in the pure, undeniable physics of force. Their pre-battle rituals were not of prayers or war chants, but a liturgy of silence. Squads would stand fully armed in the assembly halls, motionless, while anointed servitors performed the final calibrations. The click of a bolter magazine locking into place, the low hum of a power shield's reactor, the resonance test of a siege hammer's energy systems, these were their hymns. The Legion's chaplains, grim figures like the formidable Torvald Drask, did not preach of the Emperor's divinity. They preached of the Emperor as the Magnus Architectus, the great architect, whose great crusade was the ultimate, galaxy-spanning construction project. To them, the Imperium was not a spiritual ideal, but the promise of a perfect,
ordered structure, to be built from the disordered, chaotic matter of the galaxy. After every victory, once the dust had settled and the last defender had fallen silent, the Legion's masters of the Forge would descend into the ruins. With ritualistic reverence, they would claim a single, symbolic piece of the annihilated fortress, a sheet of fused metal, a block of ruined stone, a fragment of a citadel's gate. These trophies were brought to the heart of their glorious battle barge, the Stone Throne. The vessel's central cathedral was no shrine to the Emperor, but a vast, morbid museum. The walls of the chamber were lined with fragments from the worlds they had broken, each a silent monument to a dead civilization. Walking through the hall, the legionaries saw not glory, but their own work, a library of flawed structures that had been corrected. Their symbolism was stripped to a brutal simplicity. Their sigil, a mountain shattered by a golden hammer, required no explanation. The mountain was the obstacle deemed insurmountable. The hammer was their will, the force that could break anything in the God Emperor's name. The rust brown of their armor paid homage to the iron-rich, red soil of Terakthon, while their granite-gray pauldrons and helms symbolized the unyielding rock of their world. Their motto, broadcast across the Voxnet after every successful siege, was not poetic hyperbole, but a literal description of their method. The force of the blow shakes worlds. But stone, no matter how strong, is brittle. It does not bend, it cracks and it breaks. And this legion, which believed in the absolute dominion of physical law, fought in a galaxy where madness and impossibility were rewriting the rules of reality itself. The Rockbreakers were prepared for any wall, any fortress, any physical obstacle. They were not prepared for a contagion that did not assail stone, but the soul.
The anatomy of the hammer. The Rockbreakers Legion was forged not as an organic brotherhood, but as a precision machine. While other legions adhered to the traditional company and battalion structures, the 11th Legion's organization prized ruthless functionality and task-oriented specialization above all. For them, the order of battle was not a matter of tradition. It was the blueprint for a siege. The Legion's 150,000 warriors were organized not into mere companies, but into specialized, interlocking phalanx formations, each a cog in a greater engine of destruction. At the apex of this hierarchy stood the Primarch, Davor Karstal, the World Breaker, a title that denoted not just his rank, but the very purpose of his existence. Below him served not warlords, but masters of ruin. Vecran Thal, the master of the siege hammer, was not merely the Legion's chief artificer. He was the one who placed the instruments of world-ending into the hands of his warriors. Captains often bore engineering or architectural titles, for a battle was not to be won, but to be designed and executed.
The Legion's strength lay in its specialized units, which operated in deadly synergy. Gravitic phalanxes. They were the overture. With their heavy grav bolters and grab studs anchoring them to the earth, they unleashed reality-bending distortions upon the foe. The graviton shells fired from their weapons did not explode, they crushed. Tank armor buckled inward, and heavy infantry were reduced to bone dust within their own armor. Their task was preparatio ad ruinam, preparing the ground for the final blow. The Mountain Breakers. When the gravitic phalanxes fell silent, the Mountain Breakers advanced. The Legion's elite assault troops, clad in colossal, lumbering Terminator plate that barely seemed to slow them. Kadra Tor's squad, the Wrecking Wedge, numbered among them. Their advance was no charge, but an unstoppable, grinding process. Moving behind storm shields that drank enemy fire in sizzling sparks, they closed the distance with slow, inexorable purpose. Then they would raise their molecular siege hammers. The weapon heads would glow with azure light as they charged, before striking with a deafening roar. They were the Legion's fist, the final, decisive blow. The Sappers. The silent, dirty workers of war. Scouts and saboteurs who operated deep behind enemy lines, in darkness and shadow. While the Legion's main force feigned a frontal assault, the sappers undermined fortress foundations, or detonated void shield generators, or poisoned water supplies. They sought not glory, only the structural flaw, the weak point through which the entire edifice could be brought to ruin. The Rockbreakers' arsenal was siege philosophy made manifest. Molecularly bonded siege hammers used an internal miniature reactor to focus kinetic energy at the moment of impact, allowing a single, well-aimed strike to crack a bunker wall. Their immense angular storm shields provided not just personal protection, but served as a mobile cover for the entire squad, a moving fortress wall upon the battlefield. The structure was perfect. A flawlessly oiled machine, every component dedicated to destruction. Perhaps too perfect. A machine built only to break will eventually turn upon itself when it can find no other target.
The Lore of Stone. The Rockbreakers' way of war was not a tactic, but a declaration of physical law. Their doctrine, etched into the heart of the Legion by their Primarch, the Worldbreaker, was brutally simple. Grind and break. A slow, inexorable, earth-shaking advance, followed by a single, overwhelming, concentrated assault that annihilated everything in its path. The Legion did not charge. It advanced like a geological formation given malevolent life. At the fore marched the phalanx squads with their immense storm shields, their bulwarks forming a single, moving ridge of pulsating blue light.
Incoming storms of lass and bolt fire splashed harmlessly against the energy fields like impotent rain. Their advance was slow and relentless. The rhythmic, earth-shaking tread of their armored boots heralded the coming of death. With each step, their grav studs locked them to the ground with a hydraulic hiss, forming an unbreakable line on any battlefield. Their extraordinary discipline and total rejection of the concept of retreat were legendary. A rockbreaker either moved forward or died where he stood. The breaking of the enemy was the culmination. When the shield wall reached its target, be it a fortress wall, a Xenos wall engine, or a phalanx of enemy infantry, the advance would halt. A heartbeat of tense silence would descend, more deafening than any battle noise. Then the mountain breakers would raise their colossal siege hammers. The weapon heads would pulse with azure energy as their internal reactors charged. And then, in a single coordinated motion, they would strike. The sound was not the clang of metal, but a cataclysmic roar that tore at the very fabric of reality. The air would tremble, and stone, ceramite, or armor would simply disintegrate into dust. Finis. But the mountain that will not move can be surrounded. The rockbreakers' strength was also their fatal weakness. Their tactics were slow and painfully predictable. A swift, mobile opponent like the phantom warriors of the Eldar could cause them grave trouble, dancing around their formations, striking at weak points, and severing their long, vulnerable supply lines. In fast-paced battles on open fields, the rockbreakers were like a leviathan on dry land, immense but helpless. Very doctrine that gave them their strength also carried the seed of their doom. This failing, however, their Primarch hid behind a wall of pride and contempt. To him, speed was the weapon of the weak, of those who dared not face an obstacle head-on. As he once proclaimed before his legion after the subjugation of Gorgon V, "Do not try to go around the wall. Do not try to climb it. Tear it down. The stone resists only until a greater force strikes it, and we are that force."
The World-Breaker. To the name Devor Karstal clung not the shining aura of glory, but the weight of stone and the silence of mountains. The Primarch of the 11th Legion was one of the galaxy's greatest architects and strategists, a demigod whose mind operated along the principles of tectonic shifts and the laws of structural integrity. He could shape entire worlds to his will, carving compliant fortresses from death worlds. But like any mountain that soars to the heavens, he possessed a hidden, internal fault line. In the deepest strata of his soul lay a cold, black sediment of wounded pride and a measureless, glacial ambition. During the triumph of Ulanor, as the galaxy celebrated the appointment of the War Master, and Horus Lupercal bathed in gilded glory, Devor Karstal stood in the background, his armor casting a long shadow across the marble floor. For him, the elevation of Horus was no political decision. It was a personal, profound betrayal, a blade's thrust from the fatherly hand he had served with unwavering loyalty. They celebrate, he thought, his gaze sweeping over his brother Primarchs. They celebrate the conqueror, the diplomat, the wolf. But who prepared the way? Who broke the walls so that the wolves might hunt freely? He felt that his legion's victories, the pulverized hives of Gorgon 5, the shattered skeleton of the Kraken Gorge, counted for nothing. Their sacrifices, their indispensable but inglorious role as the battering ram of the crusade, deserved more than a paternal nod. They were the hammer that breaks the stone so that others might build upon it. But no one carves a monument to a tool. This feeling, this envy, began to fester. It was a poison that seeped slowly, inexorably into his soul. It turned him paranoid and bitter. Every word of praise addressed to another brother he took as a personal slight. Every victory in which his was not the lion's share he saw as a failure. And in that quiet, bitter solitude, his mind became vulnerable. At first, it was just a whisper, on the bleeding edge between the real and the Empyrean. It did not tempt him with promises of power, nor the allure of glory. It simply agreed with him. It validated his rage. It whispered what his heart had long known to be true. You are right. You deserve more. Their strength is a shadow next to yours. Show them. The treachery of the warp did not need to break him. It needed only to find a hairline fracture in the rock of his pride and let the Primarch's own strength do the rest.
The Unbroken. If Davor Karstal was the avalanche, the unstoppable destructive force that swept all before it, then Gordrak, the first captain, was the mountain itself, unbroken. He was the Legion's moral bedrock, the immovable granite against which other warriors measured their loyalty and sense of duty. He embodied everything the Rockbreakers should have been: order, endurance, and an unshakable fealty to the God Emperor. He was an idealist in a legion that deified pragmatism. He believed in the Emperor's vision of a stable, ordered galaxy, one that the 11th Legion would not just break, but help to build. When the Primarch's treason began to seep like a slow, cold poison through the Legion's ranks, Gordrak was the first to recognize the symptoms. Pride had curdled into hubris, pragmatism into cruelty. Distorted whispers, not of the materium, bled through the vox channels. When Davor finally revealed his true intentions to forge his own independent empire, an irreparable fracture split Gordrak's soul. His loyalty to his father and his loyalty to the Imperium were thrown into irreconcilable conflict. But he chose without hesitation. His allegiance was to the throne, not the usurper. He at once rallied the handful of loyalists who rejected their Primarch's madness. His end came in the red, iron-tasting dust of Vorgeros I, amidst a battle of brothers. Rockbreaker fought Rockbreaker, Rust-brown armor clashed, and siege hammers shattered not fortresses, but the bodies of kin. In the maelstrom of combat, Gordrak saw a traitorous grav gunner take aim at his protege, the young and hot-headed Tharok Vane. In a heartbeat, he decided. He threw himself forward, and the shell meant for Vane tore through Gordrak's own breastplate, mercilessly ripping through ceramite and crushing the flesh beneath. His body was a ruin, his organs rendered into an unrecognizable mass, but his will did not break. The Loyalists dragged his dying form from the fray and placed him into the cold, metallic care of the Legion's Apothecarian and Techmarines. The decision was cruel, but necessary. In a profane union of flesh and steel, his body was interred within the adamantium shell of a dreadnought, a sarcophagus that was at once his prison and his salvation. Gordrak, the Unbroken, did not die. He was damned to continue his service to the Imperium, a living monument to his legion's lost glory and its eternal shame. His once commanding voice was now a distorted, crackling vox transmission from the sarcophagus's speakers. Every lumbering step he took was a litany of wrath for his lost brothers and a silent oath to fight until the last traitor was ground to dust.
The Oathbreaker. In every legion, there are names that carry more weight than plasteel and cut deeper than any chainsword. Corinne, captain of the 3rd Battalion, bore such a name, the Oathbreaker. It was a brand not of shame, but of defiance, earned in the hell of a long-forgotten campaign in the Golem Nebula. There, he had refused a senseless order from some Lord General of the Corpus Militant, a suicidal charge against a fortified position. By refusing, he saved his company from certain annihilation, but earned a moniker that would cling to him forever. Corinne wore the name like a scar etched into his armor, proof that his loyalty was not to blind obedience, but to the lives of his brothers. His allegiance was not sworn to the distant golden-clad emperor whom he saw as an abstract divine ideal. His fealty was tangible, hewn from the stone and steel of countless battlefields. It was bound to Devor Karstal, to his Primarch. In the Worldbreaker, he saw not merely a warlord, but a higher form of existence, the perfect engineer who would forge order from the galaxy's chaos. Pater et Magister, Father and Master. When Devor spoke, his words had the weight of mountains. For Corinne, the Primarch's command was not an option, it was an immutable law of reality. When the dark shadow of the Horus Heresy fell upon the Imperium, there was no choice for Corinne. He did not have to decide between loyalty and betrayal, for his loyalty was already given. When Davor turned his back on the sacred throne of Terra, Corinne did not choose chaos. He chose his master. As a load-bearing pillar does not question the foundation upon which it rests, so Corinne did not question his Primarch. He followed him into treason without hesitation, and he took the entire 3rd Battalion with him. He became the foremost warlord of Devor's renegade host, the cold, efficient executor of the Primarch's will. After the fratricidal massacre on Vorgoros I, where Rockbreaker shed Rockbreaker blood, something inside him finally shattered. The pure, cold loyalty gave way to something darker, a twisted, obsessive devotion. From the remnants of the sundered 3rd Battalion, a new, fearsome warband was born, the Oathbreakers. They wore their new name with pride, as the new Saints of Devastation. Karin, the captain who had once saved his men by breaking an oath, now led them to break every oath, to profane every sacrament, all in the name of a warped, all-consuming loyalty to his Primarch. He did not choose chaos. Chaos chose him by taking his master and leaving only the mad echo of his sworn vow. The Stone Heart. Tharok Vane was the perfect product of the 11th Legion, a protege of Gordrak the Unbroken. He was a young captain whose mind was as cold and precise as a chronometer. The name Stoneheart was given not in scorn, but in reverence. In the heat of battle, where his brothers felt rage, fear, or triumphant fury, Vane saw only the cold, mathematical equation of conflict. The trajectories of bolter fire, the structural weak points, the breaking strain of enemy morale, these were the variables of his world. In his heart, there was no room for emotion, only the cold, uncompromising logic of stone. Then came Vargoros I, the day the black ash was soaked with the blood of brothers, and the Legion collapsed in upon itself. Tharok Vane was there, in the thickest of the fighting, and the equation of battle fell into chaos. The variables became meaningless when the targets wore the same rust-brown armor. In the maelstrom, he saw his mentor and master, Gordrak, assess the situation in a single instant. A traitor's shot screamed toward him, and Gordrak stepped into its path. The Stoneheart captain saw only the Unbroken's breastplate erupt in a blinding flash, the golden fire of the singularity tearing through ceramite, flesh, and bone. In that moment, beneath his own armor, Tharok Vane's heart became granite. The cold, calculating logic evaporated, and in its place something agonizing, sharp, and unbearably painful took root. Emptiness, grief, rage, the human frailties he had so profoundly disdained. Gordrak's sacrifice did not just save his life, it took everything from him, and in doing so gave him everything. He took command of the loyalist Rockbreaker remnants, but no longer as the captain of cold logic. The stone in his heart did not vanish. It was transformed. It became the heavy millstone of grief and the whetstone for an unquenchable thirst for vengeance. The young captain who had never felt a thing was now the vessel for all the pain and shame of his lost legion. And he swore an oath before the unbroken sarcophagus that he would not rest until every trace of betrayal was purged from the galaxy.
Captain Tharok Vane, died in the dust of Vargoros and was reborn an angel of vengeance.
The third path. The galaxy burned, but the 11th Legion fought its thankless, wordless war in a forgotten corner of the stars. On the fringe of the astral lumens, amid the dead empire of the Jaraul stars, where real space thinned and only the distant psychic thrumming of the warp disturbed the silence, they shattered yet another Xenos fortress world. One more victory never to grace the annals of glory, relegated instead to the footnotes of campaign reports. Aboard the stone throne, Darvor Karsfal's mind had become a cracked, overstrained engine. He studied the holographic schema of the siege, yet behind his eyes raged other battles. Pride and envy, cold, slow poisons, had seeped through his soul for years, corroding the logic he so venerated. Each report of another legion's triumph, every laudatory word spoken to a brother, drove fresh hairline fractures through his reason. Then the message arrived. It was no orderly, coded astropathic communique. It was a scream, a psychic shockwave that tore through the immaterium and speared the fleet's collective mind like a poisoned barb. Istivan, betrayal, brother against brother. Horus, the War Master, the favored son, had broken his oath. On the bridge of the stone throne, the officers froze. The air seemed to freeze with them. Reality itself felt threadbare. Yet Darvor Karsthal's face showed neither astonishment nor rage, only cold, calculating recognition. The lattice of the holographic map dimmed in his gaze, replaced by the outline of a vaster design. So it has come, he thought, feeling a flicker of something like pity, but not for his father or brothers. He mourned the flaw in the plan. Horus's treason was not evil triumphing over good. It was the inevitable collapse of a faulty structure. The War Master was a child, swollen with emotion and hubris. The father was a sentimental architect, blind to the fractures in his own foundations. Both had failed. Within that failure, Darvor Karsthal saw opportunity. When his commanders turned to him, awaiting the order to race for Terra's defense or to join the War Master, he merely shook his head. Neither Emperor nor War Master, he said, his voice as cold as the void between the stars. Two flawed systems that will annihilate one another. We choose no side. We shall be the Tertia Via, the third path. His aim was not mere power. It was grander and far more terrible. To let the two titans bleed each other dry. To allow the galaxy to purge itself in fire and blood of sentiment and faulty ideals.
When nothing remained but ruins and ash, he and his legion would emerge not as conquerors, but as architects, to raise from the embers a flawless dominion founded on the immutable laws of stone and logic. The 11th Legion's fleet turned neither toward Terra nor Istivan. The prows of their warships pointed into the uncharted black. They withdrew to gather strength and to wait until the two mad gods destroyed each other. The mountain does not rush into the storm. The mountain waits until the tempest burns itself out and leaves only wreckage in its wake.
Vorgoros 1. The Chasm. The Legion's doom was sealed on a world that seemed a mirror of its own suppressed fury. The volcanic surface of Vorgoros 1 was a single, vast, unhealed wound. The air was thick with sulfur and ash, and the ground trembled without cease from the untamed power straining beneath. The horizon was dominated by the dark, menacing silhouette of the Erebus chain, an active volcano whose crater pulsed with a red light like the watchful eye of a wrathful god. Under the pretext of subjugating the planet, Davor Karsthal summoned his captains to the stone throne. In the strategium, amidst the cold blue shimmer of star maps and holographic blueprints, the Primarch revealed his true intent. There was no anger in his voice, no triumph. It was as calm and precise as if he were lecturing on a structural failure. He explained the logic of the Tertiaria, the inevitable collapse of the two flawed systems of the Emperor and the War Master, and the opportunity to forge from their ruins a new, perfect order founded on logic and strength. He called upon them to join him, to choose reason over sentiment. The silence was broken by Gordrak. The first captain took a single step forward, the servos of his armor whining in the tense quiet. "Father," he said, his voice, which usually held the calm of mountains, now taut with strain. "This is treason. We swore an oath to Terra, to the Emperor." "Your oath binds you to a flawed structure," Davor retorted, not a spark of patience in his eyes. "An architect who clings to a failing foundation is himself doomed to fail. My oath is to my Primarch, not to a distant throne that uses us as tools." Karin, the Oathbreaker's voice boomed from across the chamber. He struck his fist against his chestplate, the impact a sound like a gavel's fall. "Where the Worldbreaker goes, I follow." A heavy silence descended. The captains looked at one another, their eyes filled with shock, anger, and painful uncertainty. Gordrak and the officers loyal to him slowly drew together, their hands drifting instinctively to the hilts of their weapons. The debate culminated on the planet's surface at the foot of Mount Erebus, where the two factions arrayed themselves against each other in the falling ash. No more words were needed. There was no room for further argument. Only the cold realization that the Legion, the Rockbreakers, the unbreakable unity, had been irrevocably split. The shield walls that had once brought down empires now faced each other. The hum of the blue energy fields played a tense, baleful melody. Then, as Mount Erebus began to erupt in the background with a deep, rumbling growl, the mountain breakers raised their hammers.
The siege weapons that had once shattered heretic fortresses were now aimed at brother armor. The heads of the weapons pulsed with blue light, ready to shatter not just ceramite, but the very soul of a legion.
Inscribed into the void. The din of battle ceased. In its place, a tortured, throbbing silence fell, broken only by the howl of the wind and the soft sizzle of fresh lava on the black, vitrified plains of Vorgros I. The air was thick with volcanic ash, a fine black snow blanketing the dead, shrouding armor of rust-brown and gray alike. The acrid metallic stench of burnt ceramite and blood hung heavy over the landscape. The 11th Legion's siege upon itself had ended. The rock was broken. Davor and Karin's followers, now truly the Oathbreakers, withdrew. Their battered ships vanished into the wounded void, drawn toward the dark shadow of Istvan V, a lodestone for every damned soul in the galaxy. They left not with the glory of victory, but with the feral rage of survivors. Their loyalty to their Primarch was now a twisted, obsessive chain, pulling them down into the depths of chaos, their name forever bound to fratricide and a treason lost to memory. The handful of decimated loyalists remained on the field, among the dead and the dying. Their own ravaged fleet limped from the system, not in silence of grief, but carrying the shame of their kinstrife like a shroud heavier than any ceramite plate. The crack of hammers shattering brother armor was seared into the soul of every survivor. On his command bridge, Tharok Vane, the Stoneheart, stood mute, staring into the dead stars. His legion was no more. All that remained was an oath sworn to a dying Titan, vengeance. After the war, as a shattered Imperium tried to gather its broken pieces, the fate of the 11th Legion was sealed. The shame of fratricide, the truth that a Primarch had turned traitor not for the War Master or the Emperor, but for his own hubris, was a wound the healing Imperium could not abide. The order came from the highest, most shadowed echelons, likely from the nascent, faceless lords of the Ordo Malleus. Damnatio Memorae, the damnation of memory. Legions of censors and psychic nullifiers were set to their task. The name of the Rockbreakers was scoured from marble tablets, their records burned, their data slates wiped. Their memory was psychically seared from the minds of astropaths until all that remained of the 11th Legion was a painful, throbbing absence in the chronicles. The memory of the Rockbreakers became a ghost, a whisper in the deep archives, a forbidden chronicle left forever unfinished. Officially, they had never existed at all. Epilogue. Echoes of betrayal. And yet, total erasure is an impossibility. Ink may be scoured from parchment, and stone may be ground to dust, but a memory, like a stubborn phantom, will remain. In the dark, unmapped corners of the galaxy, in the dust of forgotten star systems and the whispers of warp storms, two ghosts of the 11th Legion endure. Two opposing, yet inseparable echoes of a damned brotherhood. One is a handful of nameless loyalists led by Tharok Vane, the Stone Heart. Not a legion, not an army, but a phantom battalion whose warriors have scoured the sigil of their legion from their armor. In secret, without the Imperium's official knowledge, they continue their fight for the Emperor. But their war is not waged against the mutant or the alien. They hunt their own treacherous brothers, fighting an endless personal war of vengeance among the stars. They are the Legion's living guilt, the silent witnesses to the shame the Imperium sought to forget. And the other is the chaos warband of the Oathbreakers, the twisted, demented host of Karin's children. They roam the galaxy like a ravenous wolf pack, but they do not merely destroy, they still build. From the dust and bone of the worlds they break, they raise grotesque altars of impossible geometry to their insane, lost Primarch. Their faith in order and structure has warped into the madness of chaos, and for them, destruction has become the most sacred prayer. And their battle cry, which once shook mountains and brought empires to ruin, Saxum Frangimus, now heralds not victory, but the eternal echo of betrayal in the light of dying stars. The rock is broken forever.